Free black Americans were not sent to Liberia only for one reason. The main reason was racism. Many white Americans did not want free black people to live equally in the United States. They feared that the free black population was growing, and they also feared that this would change slavery and white control. Some white leaders claimed that colonization was a solution to racial conflict. Others wanted to protect the slave system by removing free black people who could inspire enslaved people to demand freedom. A few supporters talk about returning black people to Africa for a better future. But in reality, the strongest motives were control and racial inequality. So the relocation was not mainly about helping black people. It was mainly about what white America wanted for itself. Before the African American settlers arrived, the land that became Liberia was home to many indigenous people. These communities had their own languages, kingdoms, trade, networks, farming systems, and traditions. People lived through local authority systems, coastal trade, farming, fishing, and regional commerce. Some groups traded with Europeans and Americans, while others resisted outside control. To be clear, this land was not empty. It already had its history, power, and people. That is important to remember, because Liberia did not begin with the settlers, it began long before them. When free black Americans arrived in 1820s, they came with the support of the American Colonization Society. They built settlements on the coast and gradually created a new ruling class called the Americo-Liberians. Over time, they took control of land, trade, politics, and government. They copied many parts of the American South, including its social hierarchy. Even though they were black, they began to rule over indigenous Africans as an elite group, which created a deep divide. The settlers saw themselves as more civilized than the local people. That belief made it easier for them to dominate indigenous communities, which brought us back to slavery. They enslaved or forced indigenous people into labor for several reasons. First, they needed labor. The settlers were few, and they wanted farms, roads, plantations, and exports to survive economically. And they did not have enough settlers to do the work themselves. Second, they wanted profit and control. Forced labor helped them build wealth and power. Third, they carried the same racist ideas that had shaped life in the United States. Many settlers believed indigenous Africans were inferior, so they justified using them as labor. Fourth, they copied the plantation model they knew from America, even though they had escaped slavery themselves or were descendants of free black people. Some of them recreated systems of domination once they had power. Reason was not only economic, it was also hierarchy, racism, and the desire to rule. After the settlers came, Liberia became a republic in 1847. But freedom was not shared equally. The Constitution banned slavery on paper, yet indigenous people were still pushed into forced labor, debt bondage, and other forms of exploitation. The Americo-Liberian elite controlled government for generations. Indigenous people were excluded from power and treated as subjects, not equal citizens. So Liberia after the settlers was not fully free or equal. It was a country with independence, but also deep internal inequality. Today, Liberia is no longer ruled by the Americo-Liberian elite in the same way. The country has tried to become more inclusive, especially after years of political change and civil conflict. The legacy remains, the old divide between settlers and indigenous communities in many aspects, such as identity, land, politics, and trust. Many Liberians still feel the impact of history, where power was concentrated in the hands of a small group. What happened in Liberia is a classic case of internalized domination. A group that had itself been shaped by slavery and racism in the United States arrived with a worldview already marked by hierarchy, and some of its leaders then reproduced that same hierarchy over indigenous Liberians. Paulo Freire's idea fits here. The oppressed can internalize the oppressor's values, and once they gain power, try to become like the people who once ranked them below others. It was also a minority ruling over a majority. The Americo-Liberians were a small settler elite, but they controlled the government, key resources, education, and coastal access. And they built a society that mirrored United States social patterns rather than integrating with local communities. The Library of Congress notes that early Liberian society was deeply stratified. with indigenous Africans excluded from social, civic, and political life for a long time. Some settlers came to see civilized as meaning Western, Christian, English-speaking, and literate, while indigenous lifeways were treated as inferior. That made domination easier to justify. Morally, labor coercion could be framed as order, discipline, or a civilizing mission, rather than abuse. A United States Department summary of 1930 inquiry records forced labor, domestic and tribal slavery, and pawning of natives in Liberia. In my opinion, Liberia became a tragic example of how oppression can reproduce itself. A people shaped by slavery and exclusion carried parts of that same hierarchy into a new land and imposed it on others. The oppressed can clearly learn to mirror the systems that once dehumanized them.